Fog. It began with the fog. It crept through the crevices of the train car window, a pearly soup thick enough to drown the world. Matteo Bastida leaned against the velvet-upholstered seat, his heavy wool coat seeming insufficient against the damp cold that soaked into his marrow. He took a deep breath. The smell of coal and damp earth filled the air. Madrid, with its bustling streets and antiseptic laboratories, seemed like another world. He had come here, to this wild, remote land of Galicia, for one reason. The government, specifically the Ministry of Justice, could not abide by the hysterical reports coming from this region. A local judge, respectable and sober in all other matters, had sent an official dispatch filled with madness about a Lobichaume, a werewolf murdering his people. Fear had become a tangible commodity, one that was spreading faster than any plague, threatening to undermine social order. Matteo, with his distinguished degrees from Europe's finest universities in forensics and chemistry, was a man of science. He believed in evidence, in what could be weighed, dissected, and analyzed. Fairy tales and superstitions were mere relics of a darker age, something the light of progress would soon erase. He had been sent not to catch a monster, but to disprove one, to show both Madrid and Galicia that for every crime there was a human culprit, a human motive. The train hissed to a stop, pulling Matteo from his thoughts. The heavy door swung open, revealing a damp, misty platform. There were no bustling porters, no waiting carriages. Only an oppressive silence and the cold embrace of the fog. He was the only passenger to disembark. "Sir?" a rough voice called from the gloom. A figure emerged from the mist, a small, gaunt man with deep-set eyes and a threadbare, homespun coat. He dragged a simple two-wheeled cart. "Are you Inspector Bastida?" Matteo nodded, grabbing his luggage. "I am. Don Alfonso sent me. The carriage cannot make it through the passes with this fog. I am a messenger." The man's voice trembled with fear, his eyes constantly scanning the misty tree line as if expecting something to leap from it. The journey from the station to Don Alfonso's estate was an ordeal. They walked through muddy tracks, flanked by ancient, moss-covered oaks and chestnuts. The fog was so thick it distorted shapes, turning bare trunks into ghostly figures, and the wind's whistle through the branches into spectral whispers. Occasionally, they passed a small village, its gray stone houses seeming to shrink from the cold. There were no children playing, no lively chatter, only a heavy silence, barred doors, and the fleeting, fearful glances from darkened windows. Fear was a tangible thing here, a second skin covering everything. Matteo felt a prickle of unease, a sensation he attributed to the unfamiliarity of the landscape. But even he, a man of science, could not deny the feeling of being watched, a sense that something lurked in the deep woods, waiting. Finally, a dim light pierced the fog. Don Alfonso's estate was an old, imposing stone edifice, its windows glowing faintly, offering a fragile sense of comfort in the wilderness. Don Alfonso was a tall, imposing man with a meticulously groomed mustache and bright, intelligent eyes. He greeted Matteo with a vibrant enthusiasm that stood in stark contrast to the cowed locals. "Inspector Bastida, you've arrived at last. Welcome to Galicia, however, grim it may seem at the moment." Don Alfonso motioned for a servant to take Matteo's coat. "Come, sit by the fire. You must have had a long journey." Matteo removed his coat, soaking in the pleasant warmth from the roaring hearth. The room was appointed with thick rugs and dark wood furniture, a strange pocket of luxury in the harsh surroundings. "I must admit, Don Alfonso," Matteo said, accepting a glass of red wine from the servant, "I am surprised to find such refinement in so remote a region. Don Alfonso chuckled. Ah, Bastida. We are the only enlightened men here, I'm afraid. The rest of this region is still mired in the Dark Ages, with its tales of ghouls and werewolves. He sipped his own wine, his eyes scanning Matteo with curiosity. So, the government has sent its man of science to banish our fears, yes? Matteo nodded. So it would seem. It is well known that a monster is a murderer, a demon is a madman, and a curse is merely ignorance. I am here to find evidence, Don Alfonso. And I trust the evidence will point to a human culprit. Don Alfonso nodded, his expression grave. I welcome it, Inspector. These murders, they are horrific. Women and children, the most vulnerable among us. And the stories. They have frightened the populace into paralysis. I have tried to reassure them, but you know how faith is. They believe what they wish to believe. As does the local judge, it seems, Matteo remarked dryly. Ah, Judge Otero, Don Alfonso sighed. A good man, but he has lived here too long. He has been infected by the local lore. I have done my best to keep him calm, but as the killings continued, well, he broke. I hope you will not hold his report against him too strongly. It comes from a place of distress. Matteo nodded. I understand. Do you have any information about the victims? Any clues at all? Don Alfonso frowned. Part of the problem, you see, is that we know so little. The bodies are found in remote parts of the forest. The families are too terrified to allow a thorough investigation. Judge Otero, in his panic, failed to order proper autopsies. And what of the rumors of peculiarities in the killings? Matteo asked, trying to keep his tone neutral. He had heard of one strange detail, something the letters from Madrid had mentioned only fleetingly, almost with embarrassment. Don Alfonso hesitated, his eyes narrowing. Only the whispers of peasants, Bastida. Strange things. They say that the victim's fat has been taken. Matteo felt a chill run down his card. Spine, not of fear, but of cold confirmation. This was the crucial detail. Taken? How? Don Alfonso shrugged. Who can say? They claim the bodies are torn apart, that the monster has fed on them. But those are just stories to satisfy the morbid, I am sure. Or they are stories fabricated to hide a worse truth. Matteo whispered. He knew this was no Lobosome. This was something even more grotesque. A man. The following days, Matteo immersed himself in his work. With the help of Don Alfonso, who provided him a carriage and a reluctant guide, he visited the afflicted villages. Everywhere, the story was the same. Women and children vanished. Later, mutilated bodies were found in the woods. Fear had choked all logic, all sense of community. The locals were too terrified to speak. They just stared at him with haunted eyes, as if he were an omen of more bad luck. Matteo spent hours examining the remaining bodies, applying his new forensic techniques. He found precise cuts on the bodies, not the tearing of an animal, but the incisions of a sharp knife. And then the horrific discovery. The subcutaneous fat of the victims had been systematically, almost surgically, removed. It was not a wolf. It was a butcher. He reported his findings to Don Alfonso. The local gentleman listened intently, nodding at times, frowning at others. Horrendous, Don Alfonso said, his face pale with disgust. Such a barbarian. But to what end? Human fat? Matteo thought for a moment. Historically, human fat has sometimes been used in folk remedies, or, in extreme cases, for the production of soap. Don Alfonso scoffed. Soap? From such atrocities? Impossible! Who would buy such a thing? Matteo had no answer, but he knew he was closing in on the truth. He needed a way to move between the villages, a way to gather information without causing fresh panic. He needed someone who knew the roads, someone familiar to the locals. Don Alfonso, Mateo said one evening, as they sat in the estate's library, sipping brandy. Is there anyone in this region who travels frequently between the villages? Someone who is trusted? Don Alfonso considered this. There is one man. Manuel Blanco Romasanta, a traveling salesman and tailor. A pleasant, unassuming little man. He is the only one brave enough to travel these dangerous passes. The locals trust him. Romasanta? Mateo repeated, tasting the name. He could be a useful contact. I can arrange a meeting, Don Alfonso offered. He visits my estate quite often. A reliable fellow. I've purchased some excellent fabrics from him in the past. A few days later, Mateo met Manuel Blanco Romasanta. The salesman was a small, thin man with clear blue eyes and a disarming smile. He spoke softly, his voice tinged with the local accent. He was dressed in simple but clean clothes and carried a leather satchel filled with fabric samples and thread. Romasanta seemed a bit timid, but he possessed an odd calm. Mateo explained his mission to Romasanta, stressing that he was looking for a human culprit, not a monster. Romasanta listened intently, nodding occasionally. I understand, Inspector, Romasanta said. It is a tragedy. Those poor souls. The fog in the forest. They hold many secrets, but I will help you in any way I can. I know the roads. I know the faces. Romasanta became Mateo's guide. They traveled the obscured forest trails, paths that only Romasanta seemed to know. The salesman seemed utterly fearless, which was unusual for the region. He moved through the gloom with the certainty of an animal, seeming to sense the path. They say you do not fear the forest, Romasanta, Mateo observed one afternoon. Romasanta gave a small laugh. I know the forest, Inspector. I know what hides in it, and I know how to stay safe. His blue eyes flickered toward Mateo, a quick glance that Mateo couldn't quite interpret. During their travels, Romasanta led Mateo to a remote cottage where an old widow lived alone. She was sobbing, telling a story of her missing granddaughter. She left with Romasanta. Inspector, the old woman wept. He promised to take her to the city for work. Mateo turned to Romasanta, a seed of suspicion beginning to form. Romasanta kept his expression neutral. Yes, she traveled with me for a time, but then she said she had changed her mind and wanted to return. I let her go. I could not force her to come with me, could I? Romasanta's explanation was plausible, but something about his calm, his lack of sorrow or concern, unnerved Mateo. Mateo filed it away, but could find no other evidence. Meanwhile, Don Alfonso proved immensely helpful. He arranged interviews, offered insights into local politics and relationships. He also frequently inquired about Mateo's findings, taking a keen interest in the investigation's progress. Have you been able to find any new evidence of these barbarians, Bastida? Don Alfonso would ask, sipping his wine. Let us hope we can put our local populace at ease soon. Mateo presented his theory to Don Alfonso. A serial killer was using human fat to make soap, likely for profit. Don Alfonso listened with a disgusted expression, but he dismissed the idea of soap. Impossible, Bastida! Who would buy such a filth? I tell you, there is something darker at play here. That gave Mateo pause. Don Alfonso was an enlightened man. Why would he so vehemently reject such a rational explanation? Mateo continued to investigate the bodies, collecting samples, hoping to find something he had missed. He returned to the crime scenes, searching for any sign of a human footprints, tobacco remnants, anything. He began to notice a pattern. The victims were often isolated, usually women or girls traveling alone on the forest paths. And he always found signs that someone had been with them, the smaller prints of the woman or child, and the boot prints of a man. And something nagged at him. The men's boot prints were all of a similar size. One night, As Mateo was reviewing his notes, a small detail struck him. While examining one body, he had found tiny blue fibers clinging to the victim's clothes. He hadn't thought much of them at the time, assuming they were from the victim's own clothing. But now he remembered. Roma Santa, the salesman, specialized in fabrics, and he frequently carried bolts of blue cloth. A jolt of suspicion shot through Mateo. It was a coincidence, but there were too many coincidences in this land. The next day, Mateo decided to visit a remote village that Roma Santa was known to have passed through. He went without the salesman. The fog was still thick, and he got lost several times. Finally, he reached the village, a collection of silent, grim cottages. He found an old woman sitting on her porch, sewing. "Ma'am?" Mateo said gently. "I am an inspector from Madrid. I am investigating the disappearances." The old woman looked up at him with frightened eyes. "You shouldn't be here, sir. The woods are not safe." "Do you know anything of Roma Santa?" Mateo asked. The woman flinched, as if the name were a curse. "Roma Santa. He is a kind man. He brings us fabric. He brings us soap." Mateo felt his heart hammer. "Soap, you say?" "Yes." The old woman nodded. "Good soap. Don Alfonso buys it too. He says it is wolf fat soap. Wonderful for the skin. Roma Santa sells it to him. Wolf fat soap. Don Alfonso." Mateo felt a horrifying chill race down his spine. All of Don Alfonso's denials about soap made from human fat. His insistence that it was something darker. It wasn't ignorance. It was a cover-up. Don Alfonso, the enlightened man, was Roma Santa's client, wittingly or unwittingly. He had been buying soap made from human fat, believing it to be wolf fat, and perhaps selling it to the European aristocracy. Mateo returned to Don Alfonso's estate, his mind reeling with the gruesome truth. He needed undeniable proof. He needed to find where Roma Santa was manufacturing this horrific soap. That evening, Mateo confronted Don Alfonso. "Don Alfonso," Mateo said, his voice level. "I have found evidence concerning the soap. I know about the wolf fat soap." Don Alfonso's face went pale. His eyes tensed, but he quickly regained his composure. "Bastida, I don't know what you're talking about. These are peasant stories." "No," Mateo said. "I know Roma Santa supplies you with soap, and I know it is not from wolves." Don Alfonso stood up, his features hardening. "You are overstepping, Inspector. What are you accusing me of?" "I am merely a businessman purchasing a product from a vendor." "You knew," Mateo said. "You knew it was human fat. Or if you didn't, you were too willfully ignorant not to ask questions. Either way, you are an accomplice." Don Alfonso's face twisted in a snarl of anger. "Who do you think you are, Bastida? You come here, a smug man from Madrid, to ruin my business? I welcomed you into my home." "You welcomed me into a web of murder," Mateo corrected. "Now, I want to know where Roma Santa works." Don Alfonso hesitated, his eyes narrowing. Finally, a smirk played on his lips, a look of pure malice. "Do you think you can simply catch Roma Santa, Bastida? Do you think a small man like him could do this alone? He is a monster. He has been killing here for years. He could just as easily kill you. You will tell me, or you will face justice for complicity," Mateo said, though he felt a knot of anxiety. Don Alfonso laughed, a cold, heartless sound. "You will never leave here. I will say you went missing in the fog." Another victim of the Lobachome. Mateo drew his small pistol, a meager weapon in the oppressive atmosphere of the estate. "I will not go missing, and you will tell me." Don Alfonso stared at the pistol, a flicker of contempt on his face. He knew he was cornered. There is a waterfall, deep in the forest. Behind it, there is a cave. That is where he does his work. But I warn you, Bastida, Roma Santa is not a normal man. The next morning, Matteo set out for the waterfall. He went alone, his pistol tucked into his waistband, a spare knife hidden in his coat. The fog was still thick, but he had a destination. He followed the small river that fed the falls, the sound of rushing water growing louder. Finally, he heard a violent cascade, a white wall of water cutting through the mist. He approached cautiously, feeling the damp spray on his face. Behind the curtain of water, he saw a dark opening, a gap in the rock. The cave. Matteo took a deep breath, drawing his pistol. He stepped through the curtain of water and into the cave. The smell hit him immediately. The smell of tallow, of blood, of chemicals. It was a vile stench, a combination of slaughterhouse and laboratory. Matteo squinted in the dim light. The cave was deep, damp, and cold. Faint light filtered through an opening above, illuminating the glistening water droplets on the rock. He saw it, a makeshift butchery. Large cauldrons bubbled over a low fire. Iron hooks hung from the ceiling, some still bearing dark red stains. Ghastly tools lay scattered on flat rocks, scalpels, ladles, buckets, and the fat. Human fat. Pale yellow blocks of it, rendered from the pots, exuding a sickly sweet, disgusting odor. Matteo felt his stomach clench. This was the irrefutable proof. Proof of pure human evil. "You've come," a calm voice said from the darkness. Matteo started, his pistol snapping up. Roma Santa stepped from a shadow, not the small, timid salesman Matteo had known. His eyes were now sharp as knives, a mad smile playing on his face. The smell of human fat seemed to cling to him. "I knew you would," Roma Santa said, his voice a whisper that echoed in the cave. "Don Alfonso warned me. He is a good man," but he could not understand. "You killed them," Matteo said, his voice rigid, but inside he felt a creeping cold. "You murdered innocent women and children," Roma Santa chuckled, a horrific sound. "I did not kill them, Inspector. I merely transformed them, freed their knot. Spirits. I am a wolf, you see? A Lobishom. The curse. It takes me." Matteo shook his head. "There is no curse. You are a psychopath. You are a man. A monster, yes, but a human one." Roma Santa's eyes blazed with madness. He hissed, a guttural snarl rising from his throat. "I am a wolf. I feel it. The smell of blood. The fear. I have transformed. I have run in the darkness, hunted, fed. You cannot understand." Matteo had seen this madness in case files. Killers who believed they were tasked by God, or possessed by demons. But there was something different about Roma Santa. Something primal, bestial, in his eyes. "You are a man, Roma Santa," Matteo repeated, trying to keep his voice steady. "And you will face human justice." Roma Santa laughed, a hoarse, rattling sound. "Human justice cannot touch a wolf!" With a roar, Roma Santa lunged at Matteo. He did not move like a normal man. He moved with an astonishing speed and agility, like an animal driven by primal instinct. Matteo fired. The bullet grazed Roma Santa's shoulder, but the salesman didn't even flinch. He kept coming, his eyes red with madness. Matteo was knocked off his feet, his pistol flying from his hand, clattering to the ground. Roma Santa was on top of him, his fingers closing around Matteo's throat. His strength was incredible, not the strength of a small man. Matteo kicked and struggled, the air leaving his lungs. Roma Santa was biting, not with fangs, but with a primal rage. He wasn't trying to kill Matteo quickly. He was trying to tear him apart, as a wolf tears its prey. Matteo felt a searing pain in his throat. his vision starting to blacken. In desperation, Matteo reached out, his fingers scrambling on the cold cave floor. He felt something. Cold metal. A bear trap. Roma Santa had used it to protect his lair. With a final surge of strength, Matteo grabbed the trap. He wrenched it, its serrated jaws snapping open. He brought it up, swinging it at the blood-mad Roma Santa. Asterisk, snap. Asterisk, the sound of metal on flesh echoed in the cave. Roma Santa screamed, a howl of agony and rage. The trap had clamped onto his leg, its sharp teeth sinking deep. He recoiled, his snarls turning to whimpers. Matteo, gasping, coughing, and dragging in air, crawled to his pistol, picking it up with a trembling hand. Roma Santa was struggling with the trap, blood pouring from the wound. The madness in his eyes was replaced with intense pain, but a spark of feral lunacy remained. Matteo aimed. He did not shoot to kill, he shot to subdue. The bullet struck Roma Santa's other leg. The salesman collapsed, his moans now weaker. Matteo had won, he had caught the murderer. But as he looked into Roma Santa's madness-filled eyes, he felt no sense of victory. He had captured a man, but had he truly captured the monster? The authorities arrived, led by a shocked local magistrate who had been informed by a coerced Don Alfonso. They found Matteo, badly wounded, but alive. They found Roma Santa, bound, muttering insanities about wolves and curses. And they found the cave, with its bubbling cauldrons and the unmistakable stench of human fat. Don Alfonso was arrested, his enlightenment exposed as a veneer for corruption. The news of Roma Santa's horrific crimes spread through Galicia, not as the story of a mad killer, but as the story of a true werewolf. The trial took place months later, in a larger town, under the harsh light of justice. Matteo, though still bearing the scars of his fight, testified with cool clinical clarity. He laid out the evidence, piece by piece, the fibers, the dissection techniques, the presence of human fat. He presented a scientific, evidence-based argument for a serial killer, a barbarian who had preyed on the gullible. But when it was Roma Santa's turn, he told a different story. "I did not kill them," Roma Santa said, his voice unchanged. "I am not a murderer. I am a Lobashome, a werewolf. A curse was placed upon me." He told a fantastic tale of transforming into a wolf, of running dun through the forest, of hunting his prey. He spoke of feeling claws and fangs grow, of the bloodlust that overtook him. Matteo sat there, listening, a familiar coldness spreading through his chest. He had believed he would dispel the myth. He had thought he would bring a killer to light, expose him as a mere man. But as Roma Santa spoke, as the eyes of the locals in the courtroom stared at him with a terrified belief, Matteo realized he had failed. He had caught the murderer. He had presented irrefutable proof. But he had not been able to kill the monster. The legend of the werewolf of Alaris would live forever. It would be told around fires, whispered in the fog. And as for Matteo Bastida, the man of science, he had glimpsed an abyss that logic could not explain, a place where the shadows of ancient belief were still stronger than any evidence he could gather. He had found the killer, but he had failed to kill the monster, and a part of Matteo, a deep, terrified part of him, would now forever wonder, what if Roma Santa had been telling the truth?